Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.
For more on the tour of U.S. President George Bush in the Middle East, we're joined now by Ghaith al Omari, a former senior advisor to Palestinian Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas, currently with the American Task Force on Palestine, and David Makovsky, the former executive editor of the Jerusalem Post, currently with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The president's proposal, peace, or at least a proposal, completed within a year. Ghaith, is this possible?
Absolutely. I think we have two important factors. One, the two leaders, Abbas and Olmert, not only want peace, but they politically need a peace deal. And they will be very motivated to go for it. Secondly, we actually know what the peace deal is going to look like. 7 years of conflict, 7 years after the negotiations broke down. The publics now know what the peace deal is going to look like. What we need is political will and management of the political situation to enable us to get there. But I think it's possible.
David, do you agree it simply comes down to a matter of will?
Basically. I think Ghaith is right. We basically know the outline of a deal. The question is, do each leaders have the political resolve to sign, even if they have to go to new elections? As you may know, Ghaith al Omari just lost one of the factions of his coalition today because he put Jerusalem on the negotiating table. And he could lose a religious faction, which would mean he won't have 61, which is what you need to have a majority in the Knesset. So it is possible that it won't happen. But what's interesting, I think, with Olmert and Abbas, I think do more. You've seen about like 6 speeches that Olmert has given in Hebrew, telling his own people to condition the societal landscape for a deal. It's breathtaking. He's gone beyond what Yitzhak Rabin had ever proposed. And the question is, he may have the zeal of a convert that he wants to get this done. The question is, will his government hold?
As you note, he already lost Avigdor Lieberman's party. No surprise there, Lieberman among the most adamant opponents of almost any kind of an agreement. But the Shas party has also said, for them, Israel is non-negotiable. There are some people who doubt whether they would really leave because they're so dependent on government education funds. Do you think Shas would bolt?
Well, you're asking a very important question, and I think what's hard for them is you have a secular party that is staking out a stand on Jerusalem. And while Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, their spiritual leader, is considered to be dovish, their grassroots is more hawkish than he is. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on him. I mean, Olmert, I think, would like this whole Jerusalem issue to be like a submarine, that it just kind of submerges. There's not a lot of public talk, but there'll be some negotiations behind the scenes. The question is that enough for Shas? He's courting another ultra-Orthodox party, but if this ultra-Orthodox party leaves, it makes it very difficult for the other one to join. You're 100% right. He's hoping he can rent Shas if he can't buy them for the coming months. And I don't know if he's going to be able to pull it off. It's a huge question.
There are naysayers against peace on both sides. The conclusion drawn today in Damascus by Khalid Mashal, the leader of Hamas, was we should call off the talks immediately and forget about peace. Can Hamas, or does Hamas, really have a veto over the peace process simply by initiating or responding to violence?
First of all, Hamas has an interest in the failure of the negotiations. If the negotiations succeed, if there's a deal, Hamas loses out. And they will do everything they can to stop it. They will use violence, obviously, and terrorism. The question is, will the Abbas and Olmert be able to counter that? Will they be able to absorb that? Will they be able to take over the agenda again and set the agenda? And start creating things on the ground, new developments, positive developments that will show the Palestinian public that peace negotiations pay or not. We should not allow the extremists to set the agenda. We should set the agenda. Do the leaders have the political ability and skill? That remains to be seen.
Meanwhile, the civilian population in Gaza is literally hostage to both sides here, and clearly despair is setting in with that population. Does that become an irreversible condition?
It's very unfortunate what's happening in Gaza. It's destroying the economic, social fabric of society. I wish there was a way to be able to pressure Hamas without the Gaza population suffering, and I'm sure ways can be found. There were suggestions, for example, that the crossings be handed over to the Fayyad government to manage them. However, it depends on whether or not Hamas wants to make the move towards Abbas, towards Fayyad, and make life easier, or will they continue to hold the Palestinian public there hostage to their agenda?
As long as Hamas controls the Gaza Strip, one of Israel's non-negotiable demands, an end to attacks on it, really is unenforceable. So does this mandate the elimination of Hamas, or does it mandate finding a way to bring them into the tent and make them part of the negotiations?
Look, I think the approach of Rice, which basically everyone has kind of accepted, is that the way to reunify Gaza and the West Bank is to have an agreement and then to use that agreement for Omar to run elections in the Israeli side and have Abbas and Fayyad run for elections on the Palestinian side. I think political reunification is much easier than a military reunification. But you have to understand, like, just as that this tragedy is happening to the Gaza people, and you know, we understand that this is very hard. In the Israeli side on Sde Road, a third of the city is gone, and people say this is peace. You know, and the Israelis say, look, if we didn't like the book in Gaza, why would we want to see the movie in the West Bank? So there's pressure on Barak to do a massive IDF, takeover. And I think he would, I think this is a big issue. He's resisted this so far because he doesn't want to hurt the negotiations. But the pressure is massive. So what they seem to be compromising on is to avoid a massive incursion into Gaza and try to work in that border area to stop the Qassam rockets. But clearly Hamas wants to provoke. Israel's trying to avoid being provoked. But no country can allow rockets to keep falling on its people and do nothing. Israel, it's a very difficult dilemma.
What happens with Gaza? Can the rocket attacks be preempted without bringing Hamas into the negotiations?
Depends on the price that Hamas is asking for. Right now, Hamas is unwilling to move on any of its positions, whether in terms of recognizing previous agreements, renouncing violence. Hamas is locked in a power struggle with Fatah. They want to take over the Palestinian national movement. I think ultimately Hamas has to be brought in politically, but the question on whose terms. If the negotiations succeed, then Abbas can go to them from a strong position and say, come back to me on my terms. If the negotiations fails, then Hamas's political agenda will be validated.
President Bush talks as if his mere presence in the region is pressure on both sides, and yet it's clear he's unwilling to dictate terms, even to get directly involved in negotiations, as Bill Clinton did, and to really monitor and force both sides. Can he succeed simply kibitzing from the sidelines?
Well, clearly he has shifted the terms of the debate. I mean, basically what's happened is he's embraced Rice's approach. Until now, we've seen him basically saying, focus on the character of the Palestinian state, and final status, the disposition of the core issues was down the road. Basically, Annapolis ended that sequence, and that was associated with Rice, and now he has embraced this, wanting to focus on final status. So I think he shifted the debate pretty dramatically.
Okay, you got time for maybe a sentence and a half.
Presidential visits are very important to put energy in the process. However, if there is no permanent structure on the ground to fill the gaps between presidential visits and the visits of the Secretary, if there is no sustained diplomacy by the U.S., then the process will go nowhere.
Ghaith al Omari, David Makovsky, thank you both very much. That's our news for now. Thank you for joining us. A weather update is coming up next, followed by a check of all the stories making headlines. And remember, you can always keep up to date with all the news around the world on our website, aljazeera.net/English. Again, aljazeera.net/English.